Welcome back to another episode of Histories Mysteries. On this episode, we are going to discuss the mysterious death of one of the most prolific magicians of all time, Harry Houdini. Now, before we talk about the death of Houdini, let's talk a little bit about his life. Harry's real name was Eric Weiss, and he was born in Hungary in 1874. At the age of 4, Harry immigrated to the United States with his mother and 4 brothers. They met with their father, who had moved to the United States a few years earlier and was a rabbi in the small town of Appleton, Wisconsin. Oh, and I just want to say before this that Harry Houdini is Eric Weiss. We've covered that, and so I may bounce back and forth between calling him Eric and calling him Harry. That's what's going to happen, probably. It's more than likely going to happen. Their family was extremely poor, and at the age of 9, Harry would start working as a circus performer to try and help support his family. What a good son. Interesting career path. I mean, circus performer at 9, I don't know why that seems extremely creepy to me, but nonetheless, what a good son, just trying to support his family at the age of 9. I mean, what a gentleman. A few years later, in 1882, the family packs up and leaves Wisconsin to live in New York, where Harry would continue his career as a performer. And at the age of 17, Harry and his friend Jacob Wyman would come up with their very own act, and it was called the Brothers Houdini. And it was pretty much just a collective of basic sleight of hand magic tricks, a lot of card tricks. At the time, though, it was very complex, and people were very into it. A few years later, in 1892, Harry's father would pass away, and this is when they decided to take their magic show on the road. They would travel around the country by train and perform their magic act at pretty much anywhere that would have them. Small theaters, carnivals, they were really just trying to find their place at this time. 2 years later, he would meet his wife Beth, who would operate as his stagehand while they worked as a magic duo traveling the country known as the Houdinis. But life as a traveling magician in the 1800s was extremely difficult. I mean, you couldn't just catch a plane from LAX to Newark. You had to carry all your belongings on a train or on horseback, and it was just an extremely grueling task to perform different shows so often in different cities all across the country. It was not an easy job. And it came to the point where Houdini had really started to doubt his career choice, which is pretty understandable because I'm sure being a blacksmith or something would have been a lot more consistent and reliable at the time. But Houdini had a dream, and he was going to do pretty much whatever he could to make that happen. But just a few years later, in 1899, while Houdini was performing his act in a beer garden in Minnesota, he was approached by this man, Martin Beck, who was a big-time vaudeville booking agent who was extremely impressed by Harry's act. For those of you who might not know what vaudeville is, it is a type of entertainment popular chiefly in the US in the early 20th century. Featuring a mixture of specialty acts such as burlesque, comedy, and song and dance. It's said that after Beck saw Houdini escape from a pair of handcuffs on stage, he was extremely impressed, but he wanted to see it up close and personal. So after the show, he met with Houdini and provided him with his own personal handcuffs to see if Houdini could escape them, which he pretty much did with absolutely no problem. But the real question is, why is this booking agent walking around with, handcuffs? I mean, if someone just whips out a pair of handcuffs and is like, here, put these on, I would definitely be suspicious of that guy. But, I don't know, maybe he was a, part-time police officer. Nonetheless, it still seems strange to me that this guy is walking around with handcuffs. After seeing Houdini escape from these handcuffs, Beth was extremely impressed and thought he had a perfect fit for his act in some of his upcoming shows. So he booked the magic duo to work at the Orpheum vaudeville circuit, and I know that doesn't mean much to you, but this is basically the fucking, Rolling Loud of the 1800s. My boy Houdini has hit the big time. It all paid off. And what this means is they are doing less shows at a higher ticket price. In turn, they are making more money, and now they are no longer dependent on traveling around the country to make a living. And while they're performing at these shows, the Houdini brand as a whole is really just growing, and he is becoming extremely well known as an escape artist all across the country. He was especially known for escaping locks and chains with nothing but brute force. And I don't know if you guys knew this, but Houdini was fucking jacked. And here, let's pull it up. I'm gonna pull up how jacked was Houdini. My boy was cut. I mean, you gotta think, this is the late 1800s. Alright, but is that really magic, though? I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm sure it's extremely entertaining and impressive to watch some guy just snap handcuffs, but I don't know, it's not really what I think of when I have escape artist in my mind. I don't know. But who am I? Okay, I'm not a magician, so who am I? And the thing that really drew people to Harry's shows was the drama of it all. I mean, he was a showman over everything. This guy was always chained up, hanging upside down, in a straitjacket. He was doing these death-defying stunts, and they were so dramatic that at the time, people just couldn't resist going to see a Houdini show. He quickly became extremely famous. In one of his acts, he would literally be put in a straitjacket, wrapped in chains, then dropped inside of a large box, which was also locked, and then dropped into the river. That is insanity, first off. To me, that sounds like one of the worst possible things that could happen to a human being, but it's just another 2 p.m. Chicago show for Houdini. A very, very scary person. I mean, how do you even find out that you can do this magic trick? It's not like a card trick where you can just learn it. How do you learn that you can get locked in a box and dropped in the river? It just seems like a very dangerous trick to learn. And that's probably why he was considered the best at the time. Either way, Houdini would famously escape from all of these death-defying stunts, mostly unscathed. Notice that I said mostly. And in 1908, Houdini would come up with probably one of his most famous acts of all time, called the milk can trick. And in this trick, Harry would bring a giant milk can on stage, and he would let the audience members inspect it to see if there were any obvious tricks. He would then fill this milk can to the top with water, squeeze himself inside, and someone would lock the top with 6 padlocks. After he was secured inside the milk can, the curtains would drop, and for a few moments, the crowd would sit in silence as they wondered what was going on. And as the curtain opened, Houdini would be standing behind the milk crate with all the locks still intact on the milk can, and he would be dry as a bone, which is kind of the craziest part. And people still have no idea how he did this trick to this day. There's famous magicians and escape artists who still can't figure out this trick, and that's insanely impressive to me. This was over 120 years ago, and this guy did a magic trick that was so in-depth and mystical, I guess you would say, that people still can't figure it out despite trying. Harry was well known for his extremely inventive and death-defying acts, but he was also known for taking the acts of other magicians and just doing them better, which is such a boss move. Imagine you're on stage doing your little magic trick, and you see Harry Houdini just sitting in the back, taking notes. You're like, fuck this guy. At one point, he had purchased the rights to perform a trick from British magician Charles Morritt, in where Charles would make a living donkey disappear on stage, which is pretty fucking cool. But Houdini knew that he could take this act to the next level, so when he went to perform it on stage, he made an entire living elephant disappear. I don't know where he got the elephant, or where the elephant goes when it disappears, but what a fucking boss move, once again, by our man Houdini. He's like, oh, cool, you made a donkey disappear? Watch this. You know Charles was pissed. Just think about it. You sell this guy the rights to your magic trick, and then he just one-ups you entirely? Classic Houdini move. But that's really what made Houdini stand out. I mean, his tricks were just always so over the top. Harry always closely guarded the secrets to his own act and was very wary of other magicians. So much so that he didn't even patent any of his tricks. Because when you ask for a patent request, you actually have to provide an extremely detailed diagram of how your trick works, and if it is patented, it is now public knowledge and anybody can see it, and Houdini did not like this idea. But Harry did have a way around this. Rather than submitting his tricks to the patent office, Houdini would often perform them as a one-act play, usually with literally only one person in the audience. But what this did was allow Harry to copyright his act, so nobody else could perform it on stage at all. And what a loophole that he found. All these other magicians are patenting their tricks, and it makes it extremely easy to find out the ins and outs of what they're doing. So rather than that, he just calls it a play, copyrights it, and now legally nobody can copy his tricks. This guy he's definitely a wizard. I love Houdini. The more I read about him, the more I like him. Another cool thing about Houdini is that he did not lean into the whole magic thing. He was an escape artist at the end of the day, and he openly despised people who claimed that they could speak with the dead, like mediums or spiritualists. That just wasn't his style. He wasn't here to fool people, he was here to entertain them. That being said, in the 1890s, Houdini and his wife did go to a graveyard and try to summon the dead. So he wasn't always entirely doubtful, or maybe he was just trying to test it out for himself, but he was open to the idea at one point, so it seems. But he says that very quickly into this experience, he pretty much realized that the spiritualness and the talking to the dead was complete bullshit. And it seems like Houdini just really did not like the idea of these people trying to fool their audience into believing this stuff was real. So he would actually spend a lot of time during his own act debunking other people's acts. And although he did claim they were extremely skilled performers, which you can't deny, I mean, the act is good if you believe them, that they are actually talking to your dead relatives. They are a great performer, but they're not actually magic. And this is what Houdini really wanted to just put in people's faces. Let them know that there are no supernatural abilities. These people are hucksters and frauds. He had a specific dislike for mediums or people that would claim to talk to the dead, and I guess after World War I, this was extremely common. People had lost relatives during the war. Very often their children had died in the war, and they saw an opportunity to speak with them beyond the grave, and Harry just felt like this was wrong. He did not like giving these people false hope, basically. Despite his open hate for mediums, in 1922, he was invited to a seance being hosted by his friend, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. What a sick name. Sir Arthur's wife claimed to be able to speak with the dead, and Sir Arthur himself actually believed that he had communicated with his dead son, who had died 4 years earlier during the influenza pandemic. Sir Arthur and his wife also believed that Harry had supernatural abilities of his own, despite him frequently stating the contrary. He often said, "I'm not a magician, I'm not a supernatural being," but they didn't believe him. And I really like the idea of that, them just being convinced, like, no, this guy's a fucking wizard for sure. And Houdini just adamantly denying it and them still believing it is so funny to me. And I think this is where his hate of the supernatural really begins to grow. During this seance, Miss Doyle would smack on the table 3 times and then claim to be in connection with the spirits, and she could channel their will through her. At this time, she claimed to be in contact with Houdini's mother, who had died just a few years earlier. She then wrote out 15 pages of notes claiming them to be from his mother to Houdini. Houdini was nice enough to humor her and not say anything during her performance, but he started absolutely raging inside because the notes she was writing down were entirely in English, which is a language that Harry's mother never even learned. God, imagine how infuriating that would be. This lady sitting here like, oh, your mom said you need to, be a better person or whatever. And you know for a fact she's bullshitting you because your mother never even spoke English. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe when you're a ghost, there's just like a all-encompassing language, like a translator that you just speak in whatever language and then the medium understands. But I doubt it. But after Houdini left this seance, it was pretty much fair game for any medium going forward, and it really just stuck with him, and he would not let this go. He would proceed to write and publish books in an attempt to discredit the practice entirely, such as The Magician Among the Spirits and Miracle Mongers, just to name a few. In these books, he would break down these mediums' acts and really just show you how they were fooling you and give you a deep look at the behind the scenes. He had actually written an entire book about a very famous Boston medium known as Marjorie. And this is the title. I'm quoting the title here. Not the best title, Harry, I have to admit. Houdini exposes the tricks used by the Boston medium Marjorie to win the $250,000 prize offered by Scientific America. That was the title of the book. A little on the nose, Harry, if I'm being honest. Just a little on the nose. And in 1926, he would actually go on to testify before the Supreme Court in an attempt to regulate these mediums and fortune tellers, which would make pretending to tell fortunes for reward or compensation a crime. But unfortunately, Harry would not live long enough to see this campaign through to its end. In 1926, while performing his act in New York, Houdini had snapped his ankle in the middle of his set, but he decided to finish the act out. Because that's who Houdini is. He's a fucking showman. After the show, Harry was repeatedly told by doctors that he needed to go to the hospital. But Harry had no interest in this. Not even a little bit. And despite their warnings, he boarded a train to travel 300 miles to his next show in Montreal with his broken ankle. He was also scheduled to give a lecture at McGill University where he would talk about how mediums are bullshit. I mean, this was pretty much his favorite pastime, was bad-mouthing spiritualists and mediums, so he would go to colleges around the country and give lectures on the topic, which seems like a weird lecture to have in college, but I guess in the 1800s, magic was probably still like in the school curriculum, so not that out of place at the time. A few days after arriving in Montreal, Harry would perform his act at a venue near this school. After his performance, while sitting in his dressing room, Houdini was visited by 3 students from McGill University. One of these students was Jocelyn Gordon Whitehead. And I tried to rationalize this next part myself, and all I could really come up with is that Houdini was known as a strong man, and maybe that's why this happened. It just seems odd to me. Anyway. Upon meeting Houdini, Jocelyn Whitehead had asked him if he could punch him in the stomach. And I don't know why he would do that. It seems like a really odd thing to do. I don't know, maybe he saw him on stage and he was like, wow, this guy's fucking awesome. I'm gonna beat his ass as soon as I get the chance. It just seems like such a weird request. Anyway, Jocelyn Whitehead asks him if he can punch Houdini in the stomach, and Houdini says yes. But before he can prepare himself and tighten up his stomach, Jocelyn just unloads a barrage of punches on Houdini's midsection. And it fucks him up. It is not good. Mind you, Harry still has a broken ankle, and later that evening he starts complaining about some severe stomach pains that he had been experiencing since Jocelyn had lit him the fuck up. But Houdini was not going to let this hold him back, and he boarded the train to travel another 560 miles to Detroit, where his next show was being held. What an absolute legend. This guy is having severe stomach issues, he has a broken ankle, and he still has to, the show has to go on. He's a true performer. Drake's tummy hurts, and he cancels an entire tour, but Houdini is literally, on his deathbed, and the show must go on. It's admirable, to say the least. That being said, he probably should have listened to these doctors, because when he arrived in Detroit, he had a 104-degree fever and was pouring sweat. Despite this, Harry continues to the theater for his next performance, but his wife is getting very concerned, and she calls a doctor down to take a look at him. And when the doctor arrives, he diagnoses Houdini with acute appendicitis and says that he needs to be rushed to the hospital right away. He needs to go. He cannot follow through with this performance. It could risk his life. And what do you think Houdini said? Fuck that. No, Houdini would not be stopped by some severe medical issues. No, he was actually quoted in saying that he will perform this show even if it's his last. Spoiler alert. It was. He died. After completing the show without a hitch, Harry's wife had finally convinced him that he needed to go to the hospital. And on October 26th, 1926, Harry Houdini underwent an extreme surgery in an attempt to try to remove his already burst appendix. But unfortunately, despite the doctor's best efforts, just a few days later on October 31st, 1926, Harry Houdini died from an extreme case of sepsis. I have to say that Houdini is a showman through and through. He died on Halloween. That's pretty sick, considering, his entire life revolved around being mysterious and this just magic-like character that's larger than life. Something about dying on Halloween seems very fitting, and it just gives a nice end to it all. Not a nice end. Dying from appendicitis probably wasn't nice, but dying on Halloween, still pretty cool. Personally, I think Houdini died of natural causes. I do. He never listened to the doctors. They repeatedly told him he was in extreme danger, and he just ignored them. And to me, it seems just so cut and dry. He died from natural causes. But a lot of other people speculate foul play, and there are a few theories that I think we should give our attention to, at least for a little bit. Theory 1. Many people believe that when Houdini was punched by Jocelyn Whitehead just a few days earlier, that it had caused his appendicitis, and that was his reason for dying. But There has actually never been a case of blunt force trauma causing appendicitis. It's just not how it works. I mean, there's literally never been a single case reported of blunt force trauma causing appendicitis. Being punched in the stomach when you had possibly appendicitis already, I'm sure doesn't help, but I don't think that's what killed him. I really don't. Theory 2. Some people believe that Jocelyn was actually an assassin sent to kill Houdini by all of the mediums and spiritualists that Houdini had worked so hard to disparage over the years. Let's just say he was an assassin. He's the lamest assassin of all time. Who decides I'm gonna punch this guy in the stomach to death? I mean, it just doesn't seem like an assassination to me. He does seem like an idiot, and he definitely assaulted Houdini, but I don't think he intended on killing him. I really don't, because, I don't know, maybe it was his first day on the job, but if you're an assassin, punching someone in the stomach is not the best way to kill them. Let's be honest. I mean, it just does not add up to me. Theory 3, and out of all of these 3 theories, I find this one to be the most likely, but some people believe that Houdini had been poisoned by mediums or spiritualists, or really whoever. I mean, Houdini, he had a lot of enemies. I mean, he was not afraid to talk shit about people, and over the years, I'm sure he got a lot of hate from these people. Houdini had actually even mentioned in one of his books that the medium's favorite way of murder was poison. I don't know if all mediums are murderers, but that is something that he wrote down, and a lot of people believed that Houdini could have been poisoned, and that's what caused this. But once again, I'm just leaning back towards the Houdini was a little ignorant to the fact that he had appendicitis. He ignored the doctors, and he died a horrible, painful death in a hospital bed. But let me know what you guys think. I mean, for a man that was constantly cheating death, to be taken down from appendicitis was very jarring for the country. I see why a lot of people would come up with these theories. I mean, they had seen this man chained up and tossed in the river, and he always survived. So to think that he could be killed by a little appendicitis, I mean, I could see how that was a hard pill to swallow for people. But honestly, in my eyes, that seems to be what happened. But let me know what you guys think, and I will see you guys next time on Histories Mysteries.